Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joanne Conklin. I'm the director of the David Winton Bell Gallery, and it was also my privilege and pleasure to curate the exhibition that we're opening tonight. Presenting the work of Bryndís Snæbjörnsdóttir and Mark Wilson, the only show in town addresses the plight of the Saltmarsh Sparrow that lives only on the marshes of the east coast of the United States, and which is endangered by sea level rise. Saltmarsh sparrows nest on the ground, therefore longer and higher tides can cause eggs and nestlings to wash away. The population is declining, and ornithologists expect that the species will be extinct by mid-century. Bryndís Snæbjörnsdóttir and Mark Wilson have been producing art together for over 20 years. Their research-based projects explore contemporary relationships between human and non-human animals in the context of history, culture, and the environment. They address our relationships with animals large and small, iconic and mundane, and have built a reputation that crosses over disciplines, including, but not limited to, contemporary art, animal studies, human geography, museology, and environmental sciences. Over the years, they have created projects concerning Californian condors and humpback chubs in Arizona's Grand Canyon, polar bears living in Alaska and dead and taxidermied in the UK, seals in Iceland, gulls in Sweden, and our family pets and urban pests alike. In each of these projects, they examine the cultural lives of animals, the relationship between humans and animals, and how human culture intersects with and often disrupts the balance of nature. Exhibitions of their work have been organized throughout the UK, Australia, Europe, and the United States, and they have monographs that accompany seven of their projects to date, including A Fly, Uncertainty in the City, and most recently, You Must Carry Me Now. And the latter two titles are available for view and purchase in the gallery if you're interested. Bryndís and Mark are perhaps best known for Nanook, Flat Out, and Bluesome. This was an extraordinary, long-term, very smart project that paired photographs of taxidermied polar bears, which were located in the UK, with text that detailed the animals' histories, where they originally lived, how the bears came to be in the UK, and that's usually through the practices of game hunting or capturing animals for zoos. Nanook was included in an exhibition at the Bell Gallery in 2016, and it was through that exhibition that I met Bryndís and Mark, and that we began to explore the possibility of doing a project here in Rhode Island. Since then, they have returned to Providence for 2 short residencies, during which they identified topics of concern for local animal populations, and then having honed in on a subject, they came back and worked besides researchers in the field. It was only after that that they returned to their home in England and Iceland and began conceptualizing and producing the works. That kind of an exhibition model can be a bit of a leap of faith for an artist. In this case, I had lots of past works to look at. I wasn't too concerned. But there was a moment a few days ago where I think all of us sort of thought, this is really working. It's really so nice when a plan works out, and it all came together. So I couldn't be happier with the exhibition, and I think they've created something that's really sort of astonishing that invites us to share their experience in the salt marsh, that warns us of problems now and worse to come, and that urges us to change our personal and societal behaviors. Because, in answer to the implied question of the title, and to quote the artist, change is the only show in town. This project was supported in part by the Brown Arts Initiative, and I want to thank them for their support. I also want to recognize the entire Bell Gallery staff because I don't do this by myself, and they're terrific, talented people who work hard to make these shows come together. I especially want to mention the installation crew for their hard work. And finally, I'd like to thank the folks from the Saltmarsh Sparrow Research Initiative who are working at Jacobs Point for welcoming Bryndís and Mark into the salt marsh to observe and participate in their research. And I'd like to ask Bryndís Robinson and Steve Reinert to stand up. Yay! Oh, did I say Bryndís? That's the second time today I've done that. But I want you to know who they are because it's really important, the work they're doing, and it's fascinating to talk to them about it. And I think they're always looking for volunteers and maybe donations even. Bryndís. Deirdre is very happy. So, of course, my greatest thanks goes to the artists, to Bryndís and Mark. It's been a pleasure and really a lot of fun to watch their process and to get to participate in it. And I want to thank them for sharing their unique intellect and their art with us. So please join me in welcoming Bryndís Snæbjörnsdóttir and Mark Wilson.
Is this on? Hello? Yeah, okay. Hi there. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for coming tonight. Thanks to Brown, thanks to the Bell Gallery, thanks to Joanne, not least for your kind introduction. And the preparatory team, Ian Budish, LaShawn Hale, Lewis Turley, and Murphy Chang, who, and of course to the bird biologists Deirdre Robinson and Steve Reinert, Evan Lipton, and the body of volunteers down at Jacobs Point. It's been a pleasure to work with such dedicated and professional and skilled people.
Okay, we're going to try to do this together. As you can see, when two artists are working together, we have to kind of find a way to share everything, and we do share everything. So I want to say a little bit about our collaboration. Because it's not just that the two of us, we collaborate as a team on everything. So now, for example, we don't have any certain thing that one of us does, even though we might consider that one of us does something better than the other. We just kind of go about everything as things come up, and everything that comes from us is kind of done in the name of both of us. We also feel like we are collaborating with a lot of people, and those kind of collaborations are really important for us and kind of give energy into our practice. And that's the collaboration with other professionals and body of volunteers or even sort of amateur specialists that kind of create the sort of have the kind of more in-depth knowledge than we have when we come to these projects. So that is a very important part in the whole of this. Mark and I have been collaborating together since 2000, so it's like nearly for 20 years now. We obviously come to our collaboration with the variety of skills, but we bring these together into installation-based artworks. So maybe you want to...
Mm-hmm. So, in very brief and highly reductionist terms, our work explores specific human and non-human intersections, usually in association with a particular habitat and its relation to human culture. And we think that art has a particularly valuable contribution to make in respect of future environmental attitudes and behavior. So we really do believe in what we're doing here. So we're going to divide this talk into three short parts. And one is a brief account of a few projects to give you an overview of what we do. So it's a few specific projects, one slide each, to which we'll just make a few comments. And then a little bit more detail concerning an earlier project from 2014, which has some resonances with the current exhibition. And then finally, we'll give you a little bit more insight into how this project evolved, this current project, and the exhibition itself. Okay. So I hope that works for everyone.
Yeah, so we wanted to start with this. I mean, Joanne mentioned this project, and we feel we can't really come here without actually showing you an image of this project, because this is really where it all started. It's a project that brought us to collaborate together, and it's also the project where we realized that we had found within the subject of the animal a way to kind of think in a bigger way about our environment. So what we see here, I don't have time to go into a depth in this project. It was 5 years it took to work on this project, and it basically was an artist survey, which we set out to try and find every taxidermic polar bear in the United Kingdom. And believe me, we really did everything we could to try and find every single one. In the end, we found 34 polar bears in the United Kingdom, which are fully stuffed, not just parts, just full-bodied polar bears. And what we did, and what you're seeing here, is from an installation that we did in 2004, which was kind of halfway through the project, in which we had gathered all these polar bears, which we borrowed from museum collections mainly, into an exhibition space in Spike Island in Bristol. And what happened here, and what was significant to us, was that by doing this, we changed the way we normally view these stuffed animals in museum settings. We actually took away all the information that the museum or that had come with them, and people had to look at this individually stuffed specimen in itself. So it was no longer a representative of all the polar bears that kind of exist in the world. It actually became something that told us about how this animal had been stuffed or put together, the taxidermy of the animal. So it told us about our own history and own knowledge of biology of this animal. And then when we actually were trying to find these bears, and we're calling the museums or the places that we were guided to, we got a lot of help from zoologists and museums around the country. We asked that we could go and photograph them in situ. And we also asked for the provenances related to each specimen. So we did a lot of work in trying to trace the roots of them from the moment from the time where they were today in the museum or in a private home to the time they met man in the wild, and that was normally the end of their normal life and changed into this kind of cultural life that we know them as museum specimens. So, shall I carry on? Mm-hmm. Do you want to use your, you got the thing, or can I use it?
Oh, sorry. Just use the keys.
Oh, can I use the cursor? Yeah. Okay. So this is another project that we did. It's called Vanishes Point, Where Species Meet, and that was shown in the Gothenburg Biennial in 2011, and it also went to the State Darwin Museum in Moscow for the Moscow Biennial in 2013. And it's a performance work. It's a 3-screen video work, there was a performance to the camera. And basically what we were doing, this is filmed on the top of the gallery where the work was being shown. And what we're doing here is that we are inviting these birds, these seagulls, to dinner. So we designed a special table for being able to have this kind of, what we thought was a respectable kind of meal. The birds in Sweden, in Gothenburg, they are known for stealing food off people's tables from restaurants. I don't know if you have this thing here. Yes. So we wanted to kind of try and see if we could kind of shift these. So they are on this kind of, they've been categorized as we may say, like pests. And we wanted to kind of enter into that kind of way in our mind that if we could change this conception of this animal. And so we asked the local fishermen what was their most popular food for the species, and they gave us a certain kind of fish, which in Swedish is called strömming. And so basically we offered this to them at this carved bowl at the end of this long table, and I myself was sitting at the other end, and I cooked my same meal in a kind of gas primus. on the other end, having this kind of same meal. And I want to say, because this work is actually continuing and will be shown in Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Festival this coming summer, but contrary to what everyone expected, the seagulls, they were incredibly hospitable. They kept to their side of the table. At no time did they come over and take the food from my side. So it was a kind of and that's something that we always like to work with in our practice, is to work with this unexpected, to allow things to happen. And this is another project which is called the Íslenskir fuglar, or Icelandic Birds. And we were invited to be part of a show in Iceland in 2008. Seven.
Yeah.
And this is about the time, and those of you who may know, that there was a collapse, economical collapse in Iceland, but it was just before that, where everyone was being very greedy with everything. And there was this debate going on, what constitutes being Icelandic. And there is a poster, which is very known for the 70s, which most people had in their homes, which predicted or depicted the birds of Iceland. Basically what we did was that we took that poster, and then we found out from the authorities the kind of birds that had been imported legally into Iceland in the same year. And those are the birds that you see here. And so we did a collage in which we printed out those birds and pasted it over the Icelandic bird poster. And then we showed this together with the birds that were on the poster as stuffed birds that we borrowed from various collections around the country. Anything you want to add to this?
No, that's good.
Yeah. Another work that came out of a project that we called Uncertainty in the City, and this we called The Promised Land, and we showed this in the Center for Contemporary Art in Tbilisi in Georgia. And this is a kind of residue out of, if I can call this a residue, out of a much longer project, this Uncertainty in the City, which was also shown in the Story Gallery in Lancaster. And there's a book that Joanne referred to that's in the gallery now that can show you a bit from this project. But this project was working with our level of kind of, our categorization of the animals that are sort of closest to us, and how we've kind of prioritized them. You know, why we invite some people to be on the sofa next to us, and others are on our table. We were just sort of working with these levels of tolerance, yeah.
Or kept firmly outside. Yeah.
Yes.
But
yes,
then part of that comes up in the next project, where we, in fact, it was fed or informed by this project, which was called Radio Animal, which is a travelling radio station, where we went to various places throughout the UK, particularly to events that had a sort of animal focus, game shows and fairs and stuff, where we would set up the caravan and invite people in to tell us stories about their proximity to animals, irrespective of whether they thought they were pleasant experiences or pleasant encounters or unpleasant encounters. And so we made this very, very comfortable setting, and people felt very comfortable in relaxing and talking about these things, these experiences and encounters that, in a sense, one had the impression a lot of the time they'd never had a forum for before. They'd never actually spoken about this particularly to anyone. And very often they were, stories about abhorrence and fear, and very often they were about privilege and how privilege it was to actually encounter an animal in a particular place and so on. And then, of course, you get that thing where none of these things are fixed. So there'd be some people who'd be feeding foxes, and their next door neighbours would be trying to poison them. And then there were many, many stories like this, which are all in the book.
Yeah. I mean, it was an absolutely fascinating project to do, and I guess with some of these projects we wanted just to give you an insight into how we've been working, and with different kind of topics that have come up in relation to our work. I mean, also one of the things that is very important for us, and why we just kind of in a short time finding it difficult to maybe detail our work, is because normally they are quite long projects. They take, you know, minimum, most of the time, 2 years to work on. And for us, the whole process of being part of this, doing the work, is a really important process that we really try to find ways to incorporate back into the exhibition or into a publication that we do. So we wanted now to just try and show you a little bit, or give us an insight into another project, which is this that we did in Arizona in 2013 to 14, and you know, to give you an insight into that kind of process of how we work. Yeah. So maybe more.
So this is obviously called Trout Fishing in America and Other Stories. Trout Fishing in America, you'll recognize, some of you, as being the title of a book by Richard Brotigan, which was our way in of actually not feeling that we were parachuting into an entirely alien environment, but actually of using something of Richard Brotigan, in a sense, to inveigle our way into this context and use him as a kind of almost a mediator. So the key to this project was the idea of the search. So we were searching, and that's kind of quite key to all the projects that we do. The invitation from Julianne Wrigley, Global Institute of Sustainability, which is based at Arizona State University, came for us to work on a project which was site-specific, with no remit other than they were interested in seeing how artists could work in ways of like communicating ways that they felt incapable of doing themselves. So scientists are obviously absolutely sort of absorbed in finding sort of, and researching very specific, very often quite narrow inquiries. And so we were brought in, and the first thing we did was to actually gather together, or we had help in gathering together a bunch of scientists, including a Native American biologist, who was also a student of Native American literature. We had 2 entomologists, a fish biologist, an ecologist, and a bird biologist, all around the table. Basically, just it was like a brain sort of storming sort of opportunity for us. But they found it immensely exciting because they never really spoke to each other. They were all from different departments, so it was a kind of a really fantastically positive opener to that project. So that gave us some kind of context for a focus. In the end, we decided to use the Grand Canyon as a sort of notional, discrete environment, which of course is totally an illusion because there is no discrete ecology or environment. But at least it gave us this idea that we could work with of this particular tract of land, in a sense, of water and sky. So we decided to focus on that, and then we focused on 2 endangered species. One was the humpback chub, and one was the California condor. And we did two rounds of quite intensive field work with fish biologists and bird biologists down in Bright Angel Creek with the fish people, and then up at Vermilion Cliffs at the eastern end of the Grand Canyon, where we worked with the bird biologists Chris Parrish and Eddie Feltis from the Peregrine Fund. Okay, so we started this, and we began to talk to them, and they had this board up in the place where they were doing this or conducting this research. Basically, just for those of you who don't know, the captive breeding program for the California condor began in '87 when all the remaining California condors in the world, which numbered 22 at the time, were brought in and actually held in captivity for 5 years while a breeding program was conducted. And after which, in 1992, 5 years later, they began to release them back into the wild again. The problem with the California condor is that it has this real problem in that they're scavengers, and they actually feed on the discarded gut piles of hunted game, which are invariably contaminated with lead. These birds are highly susceptible to lead poisoning, as a consequence of which they get cropstasis, and if they're not treated, they starve to death. So this could all be alleviated, as a lot of you, I'm sure, know, if copper bullets were used to shoot game. But there is a major difficulty in actually persuading people to use copper bullets. So the consequence of that is that every year, most of these, if not all these birds, are brought back into captivity, and they're tested, not just once, maybe twice, sometimes 3 times a year. And then they're given blood transfusions very often if they're suffering from lead poisoning and so on. And they have transponders, which is how they can find them if they're stuck on a red wall cliff or something and unable to move. So these guys are working all the time to try and preserve and conserve the species. So, to cut a long story short, Eddie and Chris stood in front of this board and they just riffed. They just backwards and forwards, they talked to each other. Oh, 329, that was the bird that such and such. And there was an anecdote that came with every bird, which was, of course, fascinating. We recorded these. And then later, some of these became transcripts to go with a photograph of the body of a dead condor, which are kept in Tucson, Arizona, in freezers. So this is them up on the Vermilion Cliffs. They're actually doing blood testing here. And this is the freezers with the dead condors in. And so they're almost there as evidence, because they're there as for forensic reasons too. They can still be tested upon and so on. So each bird had a particular narrative that went with it. They talked about a particular thing where they snowmobiled 80 miles to pick this bird or that bird up, or this one was particularly sort of friendly with tourists, which of course doesn't help anybody, and so on. And so we rather like the Nanook project, we married these things together. Okay, we married the image and the text together. And then this is how we show the 14 that we had. So, do you want to say something about this one? Okay. And then this is only one component of this particular show. And the only other part of the show we'll show you is this species wall, which was all the recorded species of the Grand Canyon, which was a wall about 30 feet long and about 9 foot high. In a sense, creating a kind of a little representation of an entire environment or species environment, including fauna and flora, and mollusks and fish and birds. Okay, and the interesting thing was there was no recording of the insects. So on the back, we had like in invisible text, we had the word insects. And if anyone's read the Trout Fishing in America, Trout Fishing in America by Brotigan, there's a little resonance there. So this is how it looked if you scanned along the wall. And you'll notice that in the exhibition that we have across the way there today, we've taken this idea of a species kind of list again, and the idea of how that species list constitutes an environment. So, to this project, to this exhibition, are you going to stand up? Relax in. Just a word about the title. So in many ways, the exhibition, the only show in town, is like an exhibition like many exhibitions, okay? Because the title doesn't refer to even the bird. It refers to the concept of change, the abstract of change, and actually most significantly to the hyper-object, which is climate change. Okay. And everything is pivotal, really, upon this 28-day cycle, where the bird has to make a nest, where it has to lay eggs, where the eggs have to be hatched, when the fledglings basically have to grow sufficiently to be able to be independent enough to climb up the reeds or the grasses in which the nest is built in order to escape the incoming tide. That's a 28-day cycle, so it's a very narrow limit, a very narrow window of opportunity for these young birds. And of course, with sea level change, sea level rise, they're increasingly threatened. So it's change for the Saltmarsh sparrow, it's change for the world, because when a species is gone, the world is changed.
Yeah, maybe I just want to say that, this was also some process, as maybe Joanne hinted at here earlier. We didn't just come here to decide to work with the Saltmarsh sparrow. We came here on a visit and we looked at a few things and we looked around. And so for us, it was a challenge to do something like this with this little very much appealing bird. And in kind of line with something that we've been thinking a lot about in relation to our work to do with climate change, the rise of sea level, and the way they threaten various species around the world. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that, but then we weren't really prepared for what an amazing period this was when we did come here, and we had the privilege to be invited to join the team of people who are devoted to record and observe and sort of take care of what there is to be taken care of in this kind of situation down in the Saltmarsh. So waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, meeting Joanne to drive down to the Saltmarshes, to be there at that time of the day was special. And it was, of course, very special to, and we felt very privileged to been given insight into the knowledge of Deirdre and Steve and Ewan, Evan, who worked with them also there, and other volunteers at Jacobs Point. So this is just an image of, for those of you who haven't been down there, I'm not sure if I should be encouraging people to come down there. Deirdre and Steve will be here, and they can say if that is a good thing or not, at least not maybe into the nesting area when they are happening in the summer. So we have some pictures of the process. Maybe you want to take over.
So it does involve a lot of gathering of data. We observed. We weren't gathering data, but I guess the thing is that artists gather different kinds of data, and it's not measurements and figures, and it's a whole bunch of things. But obviously, there's a great deal of photography goes on, but also discussion and actually learning. I think one of the significant things about being an artist in a situation like this is that you go in, and you profess an ignorance, and that's really important. We know nothing of this, and yet so we go to people who are devoted and who know their subject inside out, and that's what we found in Steve and Deirdre. This is Deirdre measuring birds and preparing to ring birds. And this is Steve actually measuring the level of the last or the latest or the highest tide since the last time he was there. It's an ingenious instrument he has there.
So, it seems a little bit odd that we're talking about this when we have the specialists here in the room. But basically, from our point of view, there is... what happened there was that these birds, the nets were put out to catch them and to check if they were marked, and if they weren't marked, they were marked, or when they were marked, they got another mark, and then they would be weighed and measured and recorded, and so we can see some of the ways. And I'm sure there is a massive amount of data that relates to all of this research. Not being, and this is one of the things which is interesting as an artist to come into these situations, because or a non-specialist, because it's very tempting to want to do something to change this situation, to want to somehow try and
save individuals.
Yeah, save something. And on the other hand, we have been working now with specialists in many different fields, and we know enough that you change one thing, it has an impact on another. So one has to also understand that but still, the artistic mind goes on to think about various platforms that the whole Saltmarsh could be raised upon, and we could be maybe doing something to to change all of this. But that's not our project here today. Our project here today is maybe to just show you and get you to empathize or see what we saw and think in your own ways what you can do in this situation. This is also you see these birds. I mean, there are very special ways to hold these birds, and the people who handle them, they do this with great knowledge and care and love. And we felt very special in being taught how to do that and given the opportunity to hold them and release them. And you will see some of the photographs in the show that actually are taken from these moments that we experienced this. Here is one. It looks like he has four rings. Is that right? Yes. So that means that he must have been captured 4 times. Yeah, or not necessarily. I'm looking at Deirdre to guide me here. But do you want to add something to this, Mark?
No, I think so. I mean, obviously, birds come and arrive, and they're not. So they're just sometimes a bird is encountered for the first time, and I think there are all sorts of signs and signals that these rings denote, and so on.
Yes.
And so you would need to speak to the specialists here to find out what those were specifically.
We didn't.
But it's a way. Obviously, it's a way of understanding the behaviour, understanding how often they come back, how the degree, and because there'll be notes made against those rings of whether they successfully bred the previous year, and so on. And so it's a way of building up a record, not just of the species, but obviously the individual's achievements, and both in terms of longevity, and also in terms of how many broods they managed to achieve, within the context of these relentless times.
But the Saltmarsh is also, it's got an incredible flora, and we were also fascinated by that, and we fascinated by these nests that they do build there, because they are incredibly difficult to spot, and they are kind of sort of in the grasses themselves. But we decided to and we wanted to bring that somehow into our work, because with the rising sea levels, those plants also are covered or go underneath. Some of them may find a way to survive, or other won't, and maybe the whole habitat will not be there in so many years. So the one that we focused on was this particular plant called glasswort, which is a kind of succulent kind of plant, a little bit like samphire, if anyone knows that. You can actually bite into it, and it's quite an interesting flavor. Maybe it's because we bit into it that we got attached to it and decided to incorporate it. But we were also lucky enough to have access to the nature lab in Bryndís, and with the permission given through Neil Överström. And there we took this plant, and you can see here where it's being put through this Pro 3D macro photography system, which allows technical talk, but it allows 65 scans across a very small section of the subject in each shot. And so we did this, and then we put them together in all these different shots together in a program, Photoshop program, to create one huge, large glasswood plant, which you will see in the exhibition, which is about 4 meters high, or how many feet? Yeah.
14 feet high.
14 feet. And this is just to show you the detail that is in the image from that little plant, which is about that big. And yeah, maybe you want to say something about the scale?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think the important thing is that to do this, to consider this bird in isolation is not useful at all. It is bound up with this particular ecology. I think that's why it's so important that we are sort of indicating that or referencing how that ecology is constituted at multiple points in the exhibition. The scale also obviously gives a sense of how this grass might appear to the Saltmarsh sparrow as well. So in that sense, it's shifting our perspective and changing our way. And also, it's giving us an idea of if a single element has this complexity, which is visible, tangible, then if we extrapolate and we imagine how an ecology is constituted, then we can begin to understand, or rather to be just bewildered in a more informed way about the complexity of ecologies. And I think that's quite an important part of a project like this. When we were done with it, we replanted it.
Yeah. We took great care of it while we had it. So now a little bit about the works in the show, and I think you want to do that.
Okay. So we have 6 pieces in the show. I'll just go through them briefly with you, which may help, or hopefully help, not hinder your experience of them. The first is the digital photographs of the release of birds. So having sort of captured them in their mist nets, they've undergone this experience where they are momentarily held and scrutinized, and then there's this, of course, a great moment of liberation when they are allowed back into the salt marsh. The shift in colour is, in a sense, it's a kind of indication that something is not quite right on the salt marsh, and I think it's it's the introduction of a dystopian possibility, or a dystopian perspective that actually something is undergoing change, when it isn't good, and in a sense it's heralding the promise or the possibility of change or a changed approach to environment and ecology. So I guess for us it's a slightly darkening of this thing, rather than a simple green and natural looking photograph would not bring. So that's those ones. With the nests, which are called moonwake. And the wake refers to the sight of the reflection of the moon on the sea. It's an old term, and of course it points to the significance of the moon in relation to the tides, and so. But the experience of finding nests or looking for nests, which is actually more about looking for nests than finding them, because every tangle of grass, every little scoop, every little darkening of the grass looks like potentially a nest. And of course, most of the time, there is no nest. It's just simply a shadow in the ground. And so as you're working your way across the marsh, you were sort of perpetually being disappointed at not finding the thing that you're looking for. So again, we're back to this idea of the search and the close scrutiny and a kind of devoted gaze, the devoted scrutiny of land in this case. And occasionally, of course, a nest is found, and then they're kind of noted and they're discreetly signalled so that they can be refound with relative ease. And so that the actual progress of a brood or can be watched. So that's how, in a sense, we thought of this field of photographs of nests on the wall in the gallery. The idea of a search. working site specifically, we were quite taken with the tiles around Brown, the tiles on the ground and so on, and and we began to think about that as, obviously as a surface, but the surface as a unity of sorts. And so I think it was quite influential in thinking about or coming to this idea of the tiles, which carry the names of different species, all the recorded species, as far as we can make out, which belong or constitute the salt marsh itself. So these tiles, in a sense, become an ecology, and many constituent, and in the case of a real ecology or a kind of natural ecology, working parts. So you get a conflation of the idea of tiles, as a representation, but of species. So, and although an environment is infinitely more complex and dynamic than a surface, obviously the issue of surface here in this particular project is of great importance. Where we're talking about, potentially a rise of 4 inches will just mean that a species is extinguished. And so these are some of the tiles that we put on, and in a sense that what happens in the show, and each work, most of the works actually exist or are presented on this riser, which is basically a simulacrum of a crate. Basically, it's like a specially made, custom-built crate, which is obviously a very, very low thing, but each one is called elevation 1, elevation 2, and then has a specific title in the show. And then in the hide, which is the work at the back of the gallery, we are pointing to the possible non-existence of this special animal. And in that, I think it's important to say that, of course, all animals are special. Everyone is, because of their unique, part to play in the environment and the ecology. But in this, we've isolated this one bird and we've put it inside a hide, so it's looking out at us instead of us looking in at it. And so, in a sense, we're reversing the roles, and again, it's a question to, a future. And of course, finally, we have the moon on the water is the first element of the exhibition. And it's the last one as you exit the exhibition. The gravity of the new and full moon causes the heightened sea level to impact so fatally now and increasingly on the survival of these birds. And I think, do you want to say anything else? Okay, that's all we have to say. Thank you very much. We'd be very happy to answer any questions or... And I'll equally happy to talk to you in the gallery if you want to.
Yes. I was just wondering about the shape of the tiles. They seem to be kind of irregular and turned up. If you could talk about that.
Sure. Shall I talk about that? So the tiles on the entrance to the gallery, they are on the first couple of pallets. They're flat and sort of interlocking in a very sort of mechanical way. And then the surface of that becomes more and more complex and unruly, chaotic. And I think there, in a sense, it's about the breaking, disturbance of something, and so that it really is about that effect of either water in a very benign way, or something perhaps a little bit more problematic in a more sort of conceptual way. Does that help? It's very much like a rippling. Yeah.
Hi, I'm really looking forward to seeing the exhibit now. But have you thought about putting together stuffed birds with this particular photographic representation and the sculptural ones, or do you ever put together the taxidermy with these other mediums? Like the living, the almost dead, the dead.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, we did think about it, but we have this other ghost in the exhibition, which we felt was much more relevant in this case. I mean, for us, working with taxidermy, we think very carefully when we do that, and it has to have, has to sort of have that meaning or somehow take on what it is. So in this instance, we didn't feel it was right to do that, and we feel the solution we came up with, and you will see when you go into the gallery, is what really worked here.
And we have used, of course, with the Nanook project, we used stuffed polar bear specimens. In another project, we wanted to look specifically at the idea of representation, because a lot of our work is actually, in many ways, critiquing representation and its shortcomings, really. So in one project, which we didn't show you tonight, but it was called The Naming of Things, and it was a video piece of a seal, which had been found in fishing nets, drowned up in the east coast of Iceland. And it was the film basically depicted the transformation of this skin into a semblance of the former living self of the seal, okay? And how awkward, and in a sense how dumb and stupid that is, to attempt to animate something and to make it look as lifelike as possible. And of course it was a very benignly sourced object in the sense that it already existed as a dead thing. But of course, it is a very strange thing to think about this, to think about the relationship between life and the representation of life by using a dead thing. It's interesting. Thanks.
Well, I think we'll just adjourn and have a drink, but thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.